Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to our reading of The Claverings by Anthony Trollope. We are coming very close to the end of this book. We're at chapter 41. It might not seem so at the surface because precious little major has been resolved, but that's about to change. The dominoes are about to start falling. This is chapter 41 called The Sheep Returns to the Fold, and those of you with high blood pressure should probably take a few deep breaths and make sure you're sitting, because this is a mighty annoying chapter, perhaps the most annoying chapter in the book. Harry Clavering. Now, keep in mind, Harry Clavering has been out at Clavering Rectory, abed. He has taken to his sick bed. Is he sick? Or is he sick at heart? Because he's been diddling the affections of two different women. Harry Clavering had spoken solemn words to his mother during his illness, which both he and she regarded as a promise that Florence should not be deserted by him. After that promise, nothing more was said between them on the subject for a few days. Mrs. Clavering was contented that the promise had been made, and Harry himself, in the weakness consequent upon his illness, was willing enough to accept the excuse which his illness had gave him for postponing any actions in the matter. But the fever had left him, and he was sitting up in his mother's room when Florence's letter reached the parsonage, and with the letter the little parcel which she herself had packed up so carefully. The standard breakup routine. We look on it common now. It would have been a little more stately in Victorian times, of returning the stuff. The standard breakup routine of returning the stuff used to be a ritual for 70 years, from the middle 20th century all the way to the early 21st century. Now we live in the age of Instagram, so that ritual has given way to a different ritual, where the girlfriend burns your stuff on her lawn and films it for clicks and views. And if you are the boyfriend, well, then you kill the girlfriend and you post that on Rumble and BitChute for clicks and views, because we live in a dystopian hellscape. On the day before that, a few words had passed between the rector and his wife, which will explain the feelings of both of them in the matter. "Have you heard," said he, speaking in a voice hardly above a whisper, although no third person was in the room, "that Harry is again thinking of making Julia his wife?" "He's not thinking of doing so," said Mrs. Clavering. "They who say so do him wrong." The mothers in this book, I swear. It'd be a great thing for him with regards to the money. But he is engaged, and Florence Burton has been received here as his wife. I could not endure to think that it should be so. At any rate, it is not true. "I only tell you what I heard," said the rector, gently sighing, partly in obedience to his wife's implied rebuke, and partly at the thought that so grand a marriage should not be within his son's reach. The rector was beginning to be aware that Harry would hardly make a fortune at the profession which he had chosen, and that a rich marriage would be an easy way out of the difficulties which such a failure promised. The rector was a man who dearly loved easy ways out of difficulties. Hard to see that in his treatment of Mr. Saul, but we're going to get to that. But in such matters as these, his wife, he knew, was imperative and powerful, and he lacked the courage to plead for a case that was prudent but ungenerous. When Mrs. Clavering received the letter and the parcel on the next morning, Harry Clavering was still in bed. With the delightful privilege of a convalescent invalid, he was allowed in these days to get up just when getting up was more comfortable than lying in bed, and that time did not usually come till 11 o'clock was past, and the postman had reached Clavering Parsonage by 9. The letter, as we know, was addressed to Mrs. Clavering herself, as was also the outer envelope which contained the packet, but the packet itself was addressed in Florence's clear handwriting to Harry Clavering, Esquire. "That is a large parcel to come by post, Mamma," said Fanny. "Yes, my dear, but it is something particular." "It's from some tradesman, I suppose?" said the rector. No, it's not from a tradesman," said Mrs. Clavering, but she said nothing further, and both husband and daughter perceived that it was not intended that they should ask any further questions. Fanny, as usual, had taken her brother his breakfast. "He's being doted on by everybody. If he's sick, if he's genuinely ill, I'm the czar of all the Russians." And Mrs. Clavering did not go up to him till that ceremony had been completed and removed. Indeed, it was necessary that she should study Florence's letter in her own room before she could speak to him about it. What the parcel contained she knew well, even before the letter had been thoroughly read, and I need hardly say that the treasure was sacred in her hands. When she had finished the perusal of the letter, there was a tear, a gentle tear, in each eye. She understood it all, could fathom the strength and weakness of every word which Florence had written. But she was such a woman, exactly such a woman, as Cecilia Burton had pictured herself. Cecilia Burton was hoping, by letting the package go, by letting the letter go, she was hoping that Mrs. Clavering is the same kind of a woman that she is. Not a money-grubbing status seeker. Mrs. Clavering was good enough, great enough, true enough, clever enough to know that Harry's love for Florence should be sustained, and his fancy for Lady Ongar overcome. At no time would she have been proud to see her sons prosperous only in the prosperity of a wife's fortune, but she would have been thoroughly ashamed of him had he resolved to pursue such prosperity under his present circumstances. So Mrs. Burton, Cecilia Burton, made the right call. Her most essential ally in her project, she has no other allies, her most essential ally is Harry's mother. They are of the same view, that this marriage should be preserved. Why they think that, I have no idea. None. But her tears, though they were in the corners of her eyes, were not painful tears. Dear Florence, she was suffering bitterly now. This day would be a day of agony to her. There had been for her, doubtless, many days of agony during the past month. That the letter was true in all its words, Mrs. Clavering did not doubt. That Florence believed that all was over between her and Harry, Mrs. Clavering was as sure as Florence had intended it to be. But all should not be over, and the days of agony shall soon be at an end. Her boy had promised her, and to her he had always been true. And she understood, too, the way in which these dangers had come upon him, and her judgment was not heavy upon her son, her gracious boy, who had ever been so good to her. It might be that he had been less diligent at his work than he should have been. He hasn't been there in a month. He never shows up when he's in town. His employer can't stand the sight of him. He's no aptitude for it. I'd say so. And on that account, further delay would still be necessary, because he's in his sickbed, of course. But Florence would forgive that, and he had promised that Florence should not be deserted. So the key here is, believe it or not, that slender reed, Harry Clavering's charm. That is what's operating on 4 different women here. It's operating on Lady Ongar, it's operating on Florence Burton, but crucially it's operating on Mrs. Burton and Harry's own mother. What they see in this guy, I tell you. Then she took the parcel in her hands and considered all its circumstances, how precious had once been its contents, and how precious doubtless they still were, though they had been thus repudiated. And she thought of the moments, nay, rather the hours, which had been passed in the packing of that little packet. She well understood how a girl would linger over such dear pain, touching the things over and over again, allowing herself to read morsels of the letters at which she had already forbidden herself even to look, till every word had been again seen and weighed, again caressed, and again abjured. She knew how those little trinkets would have been fondled, how salt had been the tears that had fallen on them, how carefully the drops would have been removed, every fold in the paper of the 2 envelopes, with the little morsels of wax just adequate for their purpose, told of the lingering, painful care which the works had once been done. Ah, the parcel should go back at once to words of love that should put an end to all such pain. She who had sent those loved things away should have her letters again, and should touch her little treasures with fingers that should take pleasure in the touching. She should again read her lover's words with an enduring delight. Mrs. Clavering understood it all, as though she were still a girl with a lover of her own. And a paragraph like that, needless to say, is Trollope padding for length. It's a thing we forget about the greats. They were human. They had bills to pay. Trollope did this in installments first, and occasionally he had moments where he had to just pump the bellows. Harry was beginning to think that the time had come in which getting up would be more comfortable than lying in bed. Yes. When his mother knocked at his door and entered his room. "I was just going to make a move, Mother," he said, having reached that stage of convalescence in which some shame comes upon the idler. "But I want to speak to you first, my dear," said Mrs. Clavering. "I have got a letter for you, or rather a parcel." Harry held out his hand, and taking the packet, at once recognized the writing on the label. "You know from whom it comes, Harry?" "Oh, yes, Mother." "And do you know what it contains?" Harry, still holding the packet, looked at it, but said nothing. "I know," said his mother, for she had written and told me. Will you see her letter to me?" Again Harry held out his hand, and his mother did not at once give him the letter. First of all, my dear, let us know that we understand each other. This dear girl, to me she is inexpressibly dear, is to be your wife? Remember, in a moment, in a febrile moment, Harry has said this to her, to his mother. Yes, mother, it shall be so. That is my own boy. Harry, I have never doubted you, have never doubted that you would be right at last. Now you shall see her letter, but you must remember that she has had cause to make she has had cause to make her unhappy. I will remember. Had you not been ill, everything would of course been all right before now. As to the correctness of this assertion, the reader probably will have doubts of his own. And here again, Trollope is writing to Victorian convention with that his. He knows perfectly well the ratio of male to female readers that are making him a wealthy man at this point in his life. He knows perfectly well. It's not a his here, it's a her here. But Mrs. Clavering is lying. She has doubted Harry 6 ways from Sunday. And the narrator here is completely right. If Harry hadn't been ill, let's say for a minute that he was struck down with illness, that he wasn't just malingering because he's a coward and a weakling. If he hadn't been ill, the question would have been settled, but it could easily have been settled for Lady Ongar. Had she then handed him the letter and sat on his bedside while he read it? At first he was startled and almost made indignant at the firmness of the girl's words. Imagine her rejecting him. She gave him up as though it were a thing quite decided, and uttered no expression of her own regret as she did so. There was no soft woman's wail in her words, but there was in them something which made him unconsciously long to get back to the thing which he had so nearly thrown away from him. They inspired him with a doubt whether he might yet succeed, which very doubt greatly increased his desire. As he read the letter for the second time, Julia became less beautiful in his imagination, and the charm of Florence's character became stronger. "Well, dear," said his mother, when she saw that he had finished the second reading of the epistle. He hardly knew how to express, even to his mother, all his feelings. The shame that he felt, and with the shame something of indignation that he should have been so repulsed. And of his love, too, he was afraid to speak. He was willing enough to give the required assurance, but after that he would have preferred to have been left alone. But his mother could not leave him without some further word of agreement between them as to the course that they would pursue. She's got to be sure of him, because he's weak. "Will you write her, mother, or shall I?" says Harry. "I shall write, certainly, by today's post. I would not leave her an hour, if I could help it, without an assurance of your unaltered affection." "I could not go to town tomorrow, mother, could I not?" "Not tomorrow, Harry. It would be foolish. Say on Monday." "And will you write today?" "Yes, certainly." "I will send a line also, just a line." "And the parcel?" "I have not opened it yet." "You know what it contains." "Send it back at once, Harry, at once. If I understand her feelings, she will not be happy till she gets it into her hands again. We will send Jem over to the post office and have it registered." The post office details. Tony loves to get those in. When so much was settled, Mrs. Clavering went away about the affairs of her house, thinking as she did so of the loving words with which she would strive to give back happiness to Florence Burton. And here we get a picture. This is an illustrated Dover edition of this book. There is Harry in his sickbed with his mother and the parcel. Notice he has a full beard because he's been lying in his sickbed all this time. I point that out only because that and also a coma are the only two acceptable reasons for an attractive young man to wear facial hair. If you've been in your Victorian sickbed for a month, I guess you can have a beard. The sooner Harry shaves his face, the sooner he'll be welcome back here for wine and calzones. Anyway, Harry, when he was alone, now slowly opened the parcel. Get ready for more bellows pumping. He could not resist the temptation of doing this and looking again at all the things which he had sent back to him. And he was not without an idea, perhaps a hope, that there might be within them some sort of short note, some scrap containing a few words for himself. If he had any such hope, he was disappointed. There were his own letters, all scented with lavender from the casket which had been preserved. There were the rich bracelet which he had given with some little ceremony, and the cheap brooch which he had thrown to her as a joke, and which she had sworn that she would value the most, because she could wear it every day. And there was the pencil case which he had fixed to her with a watch chain, while her fingers were touching his fingers, caressing him for his love, while her words were rebuking him for his awkwardness. He remembered it all as the thing lay strewed about his bed, and he reread every word of his own words. What a fool a man makes of himself, he said to himself at last, with something of the cheeriness of laughter about his heart. But as he said so, he was quite ready to make himself a fool after the same fashion again, if only there had not been in his way that difficulty of recommencing. Had it been possible for him to write again at once in the old strain, without any reference to his conduct during the last month, he would have begun his fooling without waiting to finish his dressing. Can't help but think that Florence Burton would have loved to get that letter. "Did you open the parcel?" said his mother, asked him as an hour or so before it was necessary for Jem to be started on his mission. "Yes, I thought it best to open it." "And have you made it up again?" "Not yet, mother." "Put this in with it, dear." And his mother gave him a little jewel, a cupid in mosaic surrounded by tiny diamonds, which he remembered her to wear ever since he had first noticed the thing she had worn. "Not from me, mind you. I give it to you. Come, will you trust me to pack them?" Then Mrs. Clavering made up the parcel and added the trinket which she had brought with her. Harry at last brought himself to write a few words. Dearest Florence, they will not let me out, or I would go to you at once. My mother has written, and though I have not seen her letter, I know what it contains. Indeed, you may believe it all. May I not venture to return the parcel? I do not send it back and implore you to keep it. I do send it back, and I implore you to keep it. I shall be in town, I think, on Monday, and will go to Onslow Crescent instantly. Your own H.C. Onslow Crescent is not, of course, where Florence Burton lives. What he's telling her is, I'm going to go to Onslow Crescent and break it off with Julia Brabazon as soon as I get back to town. Then there was a postscript which was worth all the rest put together, was better than his own note, better than his mother's letter, better than the returned packet. Quote, I love no one better than you, no one half so well, neither now nor ever did. Close quote. A lie. These words, whether wholly true or only partially so, were at least to the point, and were taken by Cecilia Burton when she heard them as a confession of faith that demanded instant and plenary absolution. The trouble which had called Harry down to Clavering remained, I regret to say, almost in full force now that his prolonged visit had been brought so near its close. Mr. Saul, indeed, had agreed to resign his curacy, and was already on the lookout for a similar employment in some other parish. And since his interview with Fanny's father, he had never entered the rectory, nor spoken to Fanny. Fanny had promised that there should be no such speaking, and indeed no danger of that kind was feared. Whatever Mr. Saul might do, he would do openly, nay, audaciously. But though there existed this security, nevertheless things as regard to Fanny were very unpleasant. When Mr. Saul had commenced his courtship, she had agreed with her family in almost ridiculing the idea of such a lover. There had been a feeling with her, as with others, that poor Mr. Saul was to be pitied. But her heart has gradually changed. Then she had come to regard his overtures as a matter of grave import, not indeed avowing to her mother anything so strong as a return of his affection, but speaking of his proposal as one to which there was no other objection than that of a want of money. Now, however, she went moping about the house as though she were a victim of true love, condemned to run unsmoothly forever, as though her passion for Mr. Saul were too much for her, and she were waiting in patience till death should relieve her from the cruelty of her parents. She's acting the wounded lover. In Victorian fiction, sometimes the younger sisters do act this way when they don't mean it. They have highfalutin ideas. Sometimes it can lead them into absolute catastrophe, as we saw in Pride and Prejudice. But I wonder how much of this is false. She never complained. Such victims never do complain. But she moped and was wretched, and when her mother questioned her, struggling to find out how strong this feeling might be in truth, Fanny would simply make her dutiful promises which were wickedly dutiful, that she would never mention the name of Mr. Saul any more. Mr. Saul, in the meantime, went about his parish duties with grim energy, supplying the rector's shortcomings without a word. The rector has plenty of shortcomings. Harry's father is a very lazy man. He would have been glad to preach all the sermons and read all the services during these 6 months had he been allowed to do so. He was constant in the schools, more constant than ever in his visitings. He was very courteous to Mr. Clavering when the necessities of their position brought them together. For all this, Mrs. Clavering hated him, unjustly. For a man placed as, I should point out that unjustly is Trollope's narrator, not me. I know we're often alike, so it's hard to tell the difference. But that unjustly is in the text. For a man placed as Mr. Saul was placed in a line of conduct exactly level with that previously followed as impossible, it was better that he should become more energetic in his duties than less so. It will be easily understood that all these things interfered much with the general happiness of the family at the rectory. The Monday came, and Harry Clavering, now convalescent and simply interesting from the remaining effects of his illness, started on his journey from London. There had come no further letters from Onslow Terrace to the parsonage, and indeed, owing to the intervention of Sunday, none could have come unless Florence had written by return of post. Harry made his journey, beginning it with some promise of happiness to himself, and because somewhat uneasy in his train, but becoming somewhat uneasy as his train drew near London. He had behaved badly, and he knew that in the first place he must own that he had done so. To men, such a necessity is always grievous. Women not infrequently like the task. To confess, submit, to be accepted as confessing and submitting comes naturally to the feminine mind. Deb hasn't submitted to me in 131 years. The cry of peccavi, that is a little bit of cod Latin there. Trollope loves to toss those things in. Peccavi is Latin for I have sinned. Sounds soft and pretty when made by the sweet lips in a loving voice. But a man who can own that he has done something amiss without a pang, who can so own it to another man or even to a woman, is usually but a poor creature. I wouldn't give a hoot in hell for a man who lost and laughed. Harry must now make such confession, and therefore he became uneasy. And then, for him, there was another task behind the one which he would be called upon to perform this evening, a task which would have nothing but unpleasantness in it to redeem its pain. He must confess not only to Florence, where his confession might probably have its reward, but he must also confess to Julia. This second confession would indeed be a hard task for him. That, however, was to be postponed till the morrow. On this evening he had pledged himself that he would go direct to Onslow Terrace. He's going straight to Florence. This he did as soon as he had reached his lodgings as possible. It was past 6 when he reached London, and it was not yet 8 when, with palpitating heart, he knocked at Mr. Burton's door. I may take the reader back with me for a few minutes in order that we may see after what fashion the letters from Clavering were received by the ladies in Onslow Terrace. Florence has got back her little package and a fervent note. On that day, Mr. Burton had been required to go out of London by one of the early trains and had not been in the house when the postman came. Nothing had been said between Cecilia and Florence as to their hopes or fears in regard to an answer from Clavering. Nothing, at least, since that conversation in which Florence had agreed to remain in London for yet a few days. Remember, Cecilia has said, at least wait for them to write back before you go home. Sensing, perhaps rightly, that if Florence returns to Stratton, it's all over. But each of them was very nervous on the matter. Any answer, if sent at once from Clavering, would arrive on this morning, and therefore, when the well-known knock was heard, neither of them was able to maintain her calmness. But yet nothing was said nor did either of them rise from her seat at the breakfast table. Presently the girl came in with apparently a bundle of letters, which she was still sorting when she entered the room. There were 2 or 3 for Mr. Burton, 2 for Cecilia, and 2 besides registered packet for Florence. For that a receipt was needed, and as Florence had seen the address and recognized the writing, she was hardly able to give her signature. As soon as the maid was gone, Cecilia could keep her seat no longer. I know those are from Clavering, she said, rising from her chair and coming round to the side of the table. Florence instinctively swept the packet onto her lap, and leaning forward, covered the letters with her hands. "Oh, Florence, let us see them. Let us see them at once. If we are to be happy, let us know it." But Florence paused, still leaning over her treasures and hardly daring to show her burning face. Even yet it might be that she was rejected. Then Cecilia went back to her seat and simply looked at her sister with beseeching eyes. "I think I'll go upstairs," said Florence. "Are you afraid of me, Flo?" Cecilia answered reproachfully. "Let me see the outside of them." Then Florence brought them round the table and put them into her sister's hands. "May I open this one from Mrs. Clavering?" Florence nodded her head. Then the seal was broken, and in a minute the 2 women were crying in each other's arms. "I was quite sure of it," said Cecilia through her tears. "Perfectly sure. I never doubted it for a moment. How could you have talked of going to Stratton?" At last Florence got herself away up to the window and gradually mustered courage to break the envelope of her lover's letter. It was not at once that she showed the postscript to Cecilia, nor at once that the package was opened. That last ceremony she did perform in the solitude of her own room. But before the day was over, the postscript had been shown, and the added trinket had been exhibited. "I remember it well," said Florence. "Mrs. Clavering wore it on her forearm when we dined at Lady Clavering's." Mrs. Burton in all this saw something of the gentle persuasion which another had used, but of that she said nothing. That he should be back again and should have repented, was enough for her. So Mrs. Burton sees from that added little gem, that added little trinket, that she has an ally. She was right. Mr. Burton was again absent when Harry Clavering knocked in person at the door. But on this occasion his absence has been specially arranged by him with a view to Harry's comfort. "He won't want to see me this evening," he said. "Indeed, you'll all get on a great deal better without me." He therefore had remained away from home, and not being a club man, had dined most uncomfortably at an eating-house. "Are the ladies at home?" Harry asked, when the door was opened. Oh, yes, they were at home. There was no danger that they should be found out on such an occasion as this. The girl looked at him pleasantly, calling him by his name as she answered him, as though she too desired to show that he had again been taken into her favor, as well as that of the mistress. We don't know this girl's name, unless it's Jem. I don't think so. We don't know this girl's name, but it's interesting, a little glimpse here of protocol in the Burton household. The maid who answers the door, the lady of the house is not supposed to go and answer the door for a male, but the maid who answers the door is allowed to sort the mail. That's interesting. Does she get mail of her own? Is she allowed to? He hardly knew what he was doing as he ran up the steps to the drawing room. He was afraid of what was to come. But nevertheless, he rushed at his fate as some young soldier rushes at the trench in which he feels that he may probably fall. Whether it's Doodles or Harry, none of the comparisons to soldiers under fire are merited in this book. None of them are. So Harry Clavering hurried on, and before he had looked round upon the room which he had entered, found his fate with Florence on his bosom. Alas, alas, I fear that justice was outraged in the welcome that Harry received on that evening. I have said that he would be called upon to own his sins, and so much at least should have been required of him. You're damn straight it should have been. They shouldn't be taking him back. But he owned no sin. I have said that a certain degradation might attend him in that first interview after his reconciliation. Instead of this, the hours that he spent that evening in Onslow Terrace were hours of one long ovation. He was, as it were, put upon a throne as a king who has returned from his conquest, and those two women did him honor, almost kneeling at his feet. Cecilia was almost as tender with him as Florence, pleading to her own false heart the fact of his illness as his excuse. There was nothing of the pallor of the sick room left with him. No, I don't doubt there wasn't. A slight tenuity in his hands and the brightness in his eyes, which did him some yeoman's service, maybe. Had he been quite robust, Cecilia might have felt that she could not justify herself to peculiar softness of her words. After the first quarter of an hour, he was supremely happy. His awkwardness was gone, and as he sat with his arm round Florence's waist, he found that the little pencil case had been again attached to her chain. And as he looked down upon her, he saw that the cheap brooch was again on her breast. It would have been pretty, could an observer have been there, to see the skill with which they both steered clear of any word or phrase which would be disagreeable to him. One might have thought that it would have been impossible to avoid all touch of a rebuke. The very fact that he was forgiven would seem to be implied that some fault that required action. How can you forgive him if you're not going to bring up what you're forgiving him for? But they don't. But there was no hint at any fault. The tact of women excels the skill of men, and so perfect was the tact of these women that not a word was said which wounded Harry's ear. He had come again into their fold, and they were rejoiced and showed their joy. He who had gone astray had repented, and they were beautifully tender to the repentant sheep. Okay. All right, well, there we have a resolution. Harry has decided on his fate. He was split between two women. He told two women he was going to marry them. He's now decided on Florence Burton. In a way, it makes sense. He's not a brave man, And it would take a supremely brave man to decide on Lady Ongar, because as Harry himself rightly saw, it would mean excommunication, social excommunication from everyone he knows. His parents would no longer see him. Needless to say, Florence Burton, the Burtons would no longer see him. He would lose his job. He wouldn't need it anymore. If he'd have £7,000 a year and Ongar Park, he wouldn't need a job anymore. But that's all he would have. Everyone, he wouldn't be welcome at any clubs. He wouldn't be welcome back at his university. Everyone would know this is the man who jilted his intended bride, the woman who actually went to his parents as his intended bride, for money. Everyone would know he was that person. So it would have taken a great deal of courage to do, and he doesn't do it. The sheep has now come back into the fold. So he has, as we mentioned in this chapter, one other duty to perform. He must break things off forever with Julia. So we will get to that next time. Thank you, BookTube.